What's happening, Priceline Nation, and everyone out there interested in talking about LDL cholesterol? My name is Mike Roberto, and I'm the founder of a tech and media company known as PricePlow. We cover a lot of the dietary supplement industry, do a lot of reviews, talk about ingredients, and get into a lot of diet research. And that's where I'm going to be going a lot more in the future, especially in this video. So over the last few months, I made a few dietary changes, which honestly had me feeling, and in my opinion, looking better than I've been in about 10 years. And as many of us have been talking here on the channel, I'm about to undergo what is going to be a very large diet journey. I'm going to be doing a lot of testing, and I'm going to be documenting a lot of that on the channel. So given I have an insurance plan, I decided to get my first round of blood work done through the primary care provider that I have through Blue Cross, and I ended up getting my blood work done, which came with a standard lipid panel. Now, I'm going to show you all the data, and this is going to be the start of me showing you a lot of data about myself. But in general, I need to, before I get into all the details, all the specifics, I need to throw down a few disclaimers. First off, I am going to do something here that is kind of against the standard of care and against the norm in the medical community. So this is not medical advice. This is my personal story combined with the data that I have here. And we have a blog post detailing everything I'm going to be mentioning here, except for when I theorize things, which I might get into a little bit. But we're going to be talking about various research, but also my personal story, and nothing here is to be taken as medical advice. I have what is considered to be a relatively specific and unique situation here, and so I don't want this video to be taken out of context. This is not medical advice, and I am not a doctor. I am really basically a tech CEO, if anything else, with a high fascination for all things diet and eating real food and all of that. So that is my first disclaimer. My second comment is that this is the first part of a 3-part series. There are a lot of changes that are going to be coming to this channel and to PricePlow in general. So this 3-part series will mostly deal with, first off, my LDL cholesterol levels and why, specifically pertaining to my situation, I am not overly concerned, but I do want to do some stuff to try to improve my situation. Second, we're going to be talking about what the real risk factors are for cardiovascular disease and heart disease. And third, we're going to talk about how I believe you can put yourself in a better risk situation with diet and lifestyle. So no matter what, I was ready to get on this journey after discovering some cool diet stuff. And the long story short is I really upped my beef consumption and got some things out of my diet, and I got to the point where I was, for the first time in a long time, actually confident enough to show my picture to this bodybuilding community out here with a lot of our fans have way better physiques than I do. And so on March 8th of 2019, I showed a picture stating, all right, it is time for me to be myself and to show my journey. And given my age, given my situation, I have a young daughter at home. I am not trying to break any world records. I am just merely trying to be healthy, high energy, feel great, and avoid the dad bod. So I showed a picture of myself on March 8th, 2019, feeling honestly better than I felt in the last 10 years. And then it was time to get blood work. And when I got that blood work, and we'll show it right here on the side, I got a message alongside of it, and basically it came in with a message from the technician that LDL cholesterol in range for statin therapy. Needs to come back to discuss labs and treatment options. So right off the bat, given my numbers, and this is a snapshot of a whole lot of moving parts, given one single number at one moment in time, these folks were already ready to put me on statins, which could make sense in a lot of situations. Note that I am not fully anti-statins. We're going to get into that a little bit. But for me, being 37 years old, what were we going to do? Put me on statins for 50 years straight? Just based on one number at one point in time? I wasn't really sold on that, and you'll see why. So my numbers specifically were, the triglycerides were 66, my HDL cholesterol, which is the healthy cholesterol, 59, my LDL cholesterol, this is where the big bold red is on the blog post, my LDL cholesterol of 193, my total cholesterol of 269, and then also an HbA1c of a relatively low 5.2. So this, as you can tell, and if I haven't mentioned it yet, I am a very low carb dieter. I am most often in a state of ketosis, and I typically am very fat adapted and don't really require a whole lot of carbohydrate, dietary carbohydrate to operate. Everyone requires carbohydrate, but you don't require dietary carbohydrate. And so I get in quite a low amount, and the amounts I do come from a little bit of supplements here and there from this channel doing reviews, but also from like fibrous vegetables. I'm a big fan of Brussels sprouts, asparagus, and spinach pretty much, and that's the extent of the most of my carbohydrate consumption. So what you're going to see here is that the data I have is not exactly foreign to a lot of people who share similar characteristics as me. And when doctors see these numbers, they tend to freak out. Or doctors who don't really fully understand all the data around it, or doctors who don't understand how this diet works, or doctors who just need, or legally speaking, or per their bosses, they have to perform a standard of care. When they see these numbers, they don't like it. However, when I am told to take a prescription drug, presumably forever, I don't know, when I'm told to either change my diet or take a prescription drug, then I have an issue with that and need to do a lot more research, especially when I am looking and feeling better at age 37 than I have since my late 20s. So basically, given this one number looking bad and nothing else, they're ready to throw me on drugs. And so what happened here? How did we get to this point? And so we got to rewind a little bit, and then we're going to rewind a little bit more. But in general, it's time to meet the lipid hypothesis, also known as the cholesterol hypothesis. And this generally states that, and it's a theory, it's an unproven theory, but there is a lot of associative data that kind of skews in that direction for a lot of types of people. The question is it my type of person? And so the lipid hypothesis is basically a theory that states that there is a link between high cholesterol levels and high rates of cardiovascular disease. So there's probably a good chance that you've seen this image right here from a 1984 Time magazine article. And this is where the public scare really took off. Now, we have to go, before we get into that article, we have to go a little bit further back. And it's actually a study in 1976 that came out, and it was based upon a lipid-lowering medication. And what it stated was that measures used to lower the plasma lipids in patients with hyperlipidemia will lead to reductions in new events of coronary heart disease. Further though, what's really interesting is that study didn't show any preventative measures in terms of mortality or death, but there was less heart disease given that medication. So that kind of started things going a little bit. And then though, the Time magazine article came out about 8 years later, and what they did is they tried to connect this lipid hypothesis that higher cholesterol levels in the blood lead to higher rates of heart disease. They tried to connect that to diet, even though that this was a drug intervention. So they made several steps. There was a big leap of faith there, but at that point, once this magazine ran, it wasn't in the day of the internet or anything. And Time magazine at the time was a trusted, reputable outlet at the time. Well, when they made that statement and when they had that frowny face of bacon and eggs, it led to a massive public scare that kind of still sticks with us today, connecting the dietary part of things with a drug intervention, even though the hypothesis still had not been proven out. It still hasn't to this day for a lot of types of individuals. And also, even if you lower the amount of cholesterol you eat in your diet, it really doesn't move cholesterol levels in your blood as much as you would think, because your body can produce its own cholesterol anyway. So it counterbalances what you do diet-wise in terms of cholesterol production. But given all that we know, it didn't matter. They ran with that magazine, and then all of a sudden, cholesterol was bad, eggs were bad, red meat was bad, and you were advised to stay away from all of that. Well, America listened, and as we know, America got a whole lot sicker. However, over the course of time, we've started to see a few things that were problematic in this lipid hypothesis. For instance, there is a lot of research regarding mortality and cholesterol levels, especially in older individuals, where this pesky problem kept popping up, where higher cholesterol levels in the bloodstream were actually correlating with lower mortality. And so for a lot of individuals, it seemed like this cholesterol was protective in some sort. However, they were able to stratify the data a little bit more, and they were able to show that, and this is inarguable for a lot of different things and a lot of different types of people, but as the scientists and the drug manufacturers were able to lower a lot of individuals' LDL levels, they were also able to lower a lot of heart disease and a lot of mortality in certain trials. And that is especially true for individuals with horrific diets, for instance. Now, and so I'm not going to argue in that, and that's why I'm not, purely anti-statin. The thing is, though, in my opinion, I don't have a horrific diet, and I think my A1C level kind of shows that. So the target started moving towards data that was a little bit more friendly to that. However, as we're going to see, I need to figure out what's going on with me as a low-carb dieter, because most of the people we're talking about here who are getting heart disease were not exactly eating clean. They weren't exactly eating low carbohydrate or low sugar foods. They are possibly and probably eating a whole lot of industrialized processed seed oils, which I truly believe to be the real culprit of our obesity crisis. And so there's a lot of differences between those individuals who are getting LDL lowering medications and having a little bit less mortality, a little bit less heart disease. There's a lot of difference between them and myself. So instead, what I needed to do before deciding if I'm going to jump on any drug trials, and I do take this seriously. Obviously, I take this very seriously. I'm here making this video, and I'm about to embark on a very, very big diet journey because I do want to try to improve some stuff. But the numbers I want to improve they're not necessarily LDL, even though it'll be fun and interesting to see if we can. So I need to find some people. If you notice with my blood work, I need to find some people who are similar to me. And so if you take a look at my blood work, I have a few different traits that are very unique, and they are not typical of these people who oftentimes have high LDL cholesterol levels. First off, my triglycerides are low. My serum triglycerides are low, so I don't have a whole lot of triglyceride in my bloodstream at any given time, or at least during this snapshot. This is only one test. Second, yes, my LDL is quite high, but also the good cholesterol, my HDL, is also quite high. And finally, I have a low body fat level, not the lowest obviously, but it's probably around 14-15%. I have a low body fat level and I have a very low HbA1c level. But most importantly, I have the trifecta of having the high LDL, but also low triglycerides and high HDL. So what we want to do here, and I've never been on drugs, so that's an important thing. So what we want to do here is we want to find other studies, preferably observational studies that have no drugs involved, and we want to see what happens when the studies are tracking individuals and they are able to break it down by the trifecta for people who have my similar type of blood work here. And there's actually 3 studies that show that. So we're going to go into these 3 studies, and again, all these citations, all these research studies, all the graphs, it's all cited in the blog post that was associated with this video. And on top of that, I do have to give some credit to 2 gentlemen, Ivor Cummins, who is also known as Fat Emperor, and Dave Feldman, who we're going to talk about a little bit more in this video. I have to give them credit because I'm stealing some of their annotations that you're going to see up here. So let's break down the 3 studies that we found that have people with similar types of blood levels than me. First off, we have the Framingham study. And this was a very large study with over 52,000 individuals. I believe they were Norwegian, ages 20 to 74. And this is an observational study following people over the course of time. I believe it's still going on actually as time goes on. And so there's a lot of interesting stuff that they're able to pull out of this study. And over the course of 10 years, they tracked and were able to exclude anyone that was on a lipid-lowering medication, because I'm not, and that's not who we want to deal with. That's kind of cheating in a way. So we want to look at the individuals who have heart disease but do not have lipid-lowering medications. Where do they reside? And so we have a chart right here that will show, and in the green areas of that chart is actually where my breakdown is. Now I'll show you how you can read this, but essentially, it's broken down by, first off, the low HDL groups and the high HDL groups. Remember, high HDL is the more cardioprotective HDL, or it's associated with people who get less heart disease. Let's put it that way. So it's broken in half on the left side and right side by low and high HDL. Then the subgroups are also broken down by triglyceride levels and by, of course, the LDL levels. Now, LDL is broken out at 130. And the triglycerides are broken down But they're also broken down again at 100, and the triglyceride levels are broken down at 100 as well. So I'm in the group where my LDL is greater than 130, but my triglycerides are less than 100, and I'm well below that. And my HDL is in the high HDL group. I'm at 59, and this is broken down at 40. So I'm well into that range. Now, if you look at these odds ratios, basically, if it's a 1.0, then you would have a more or less average chance of getting heart disease throughout this 10-year study. This is 10 years here. We're not talking about lifetime. And that's going to be important as we get down on this journey, because everything I do, obviously I can't give you lifetime data on myself. So this is a 10-year data-based system. Now, if you look at the left side, you're going to see all 1.0 X's, where that means if it's greater than 1.0, they had a higher chance of getting heart disease. Those are the ORs, or the odds ratios. Anything over 1.0 is a greater than average likelihood of getting whatever it is. In this case, that is heart disease. If it's less than 1.0, then you have a lower than average chance of getting heart disease. So you want it to be lower in this case. It depends on the study. So in this case, we don't want heart disease. Now, if you look at where I'm at, it's actually a 0.7. And the lowest number you're going to see on this chart is actually a 0.6. So I am in one of the lowest likelihood groups of people getting heart disease, because my triglycerides are low and my HDL is high. And we're going to talk about why this is theorized and what this has to do with LDL. But basically, this whole chart is pretty much showing, this study is showing there's a very, very big divide, and it's not LDL. It's actually HDL in this case. So if you have high HDL, you're looking pretty good no matter what. You could be a little bit better, but oftentimes if you have low HDL, then that's a sign of something else going wrong. And you can't just pump yourself full of HDL. We can get into that as well. But it's a very, very strong signal. And in this case, it's stronger than LDL. LDL, as we're going to see, is not a strong risk factor on its own. And I'm going to say that a lot of times in this video. So that's pretty much the moral of this story. However, it is associated with heart disease, so it needs to be taken seriously. So the second study, where it was observational and non-drug based, and they were able to break out the data pertaining to my situation, the trifecta of serum triglycerides and lipids and all that. This study was a monster 8-year study tracking over 102,000 individuals. Now, this one doesn't fully pertain to me because I'm 37 and they were tracking 50 to 75-year-olds here. But they do break things down a lot. And where they broke the LDL down was at 140. So I'm going to be in the LDL group here, but what they end up doing is using ratios later on in the study to further stratify things. So that's where we're going to go with my data on this one. Now, in this case, if you look at the individuals, if you just lop the world in half, right here, high LDL individuals over 140 on this half over here, and then low LDL individuals under or equal to 140 over here, then what you end up having is a 14% chance of getting heart disease if you have the high LDL, but a 13% chance of getting heart disease if you're in lower LDL. That's not a significant difference. That is not a good way of breaking down humans. You might as well just make a random stab and split people in half, and you're going to get numbers kind of like that. So clearly, this is not enough data to be making a decision on alone based on these individuals at least. So in this study, if you break things down by the triglyceride to HDL ratio, meaning if you have high triglycerides, high serum triglycerides, and low HDL, the number is going to be way higher. And if you have a lower triglyceride and higher HDL, you're going to have a lower number. And in this case, you want to have a lower number. If you break down the individuals by that, you get a staggering difference, and we'll pop that up right here. And in this case, if you have a lower triglyceride to HDL ratio, you had about a 9.2% chance of getting heart disease in the next 8 years. But if you had a higher triglyceride to HDL ratio, you had nearly double the chance of getting heart disease. And that was at 18.5% disease incidence. So nearly 1 in 5 people with those types of numbers over the course of 8 years were getting heart disease. That is a strong risk factor. That is a better breakdown. There's clearly more going on than LDL. LDL is nearly split in half. And so if you plug my data into what's happening here, I'm in the lowest risk group out of just 4 groups. Obviously, with the Framingham study had a little bit more of stratification, but here I'm in the lowest risk group out of the individuals. Just like with the Framingham study, I have the second lowest odds ratio, and there's only a few different groups that could be lower. And so it may be a challenge to get into those lower groups, and maybe we'll test some of that stuff along the way. But what we're seeing here is that based upon LDL alone, it is not a strong enough risk factor to take action without extra information. And this is mostly, a lot of this is why I'm here making this video, is because I actually knew a lot of this. I was already following a lot of the researchers. On Twitter is a great place to find them. And I kind of had a feeling that something like this may be possible, because I'm not the first person who's gone on a low carb diet and this has happened to. But what upsets me is that I asked for more data. I asked for certain other tests, a coronary artery calcium score. I asked for fasting insulin levels, which I've never had. I asked for a more advanced lipoprotein test so that we can know both particle size and particle count. And I was rejected those. And that's why I was very upset with the way I was treated by this primary care clinic. I'm not going to say who they are, but they've since been removed as my primary care clinic. I am willing to test new diet strategies, to tinker with things, and that's what I'm going to do. But at the same time, I've seen how insulin resistant I can get. And that's what happens with this chart right here, is that when you have a higher triglyceride and a lower HDL ratio, it's indicative of insulin resistance. It's not a true perfect marker, but it's indicative of more insulin resistance. And to me, insulin resistance is the situation where our bodies are no longer wanting to accept more fat storage, more sugar into our cells, because our muscles are full, our livers are full, and basically our fat cells do not want to accept any more. And we become resistant to the insulin hormone, which is kind of the key that unlocks that fat storage. So what does our body have to do? It has to pump out more insulin. And in my theory, where we're going here is that it's the insulin, and alongside of the increased blood sugar, because that blood sugar is floating around, that insulin is what's damaging. Well, in the same case, I think with the high triglyceride levels, we have no place to put the triglycerides as well. So we have a lot of crap floating around in our bloodstream, and a lot of that crap is dangerous. And that's what's leading to eventually all this crap can get oxidized and calcified, and that's where we have a lot of damage. We have seen studies where high insulin levels damage the endothelium, your veins and your arteries. Everything can get damaged from high levels of insulin too long. And high levels of insulin don't really happen during a low carb diet. This is during times of high carbohydrate consumption and low exercise. So anyway, these ratios are a little bit more indicative of other types of individuals. But the nurse practitioner I was seeing, I wasn't even seeing a doctor at this point. The nurse practitioner basically said no to other tests. And he didn't force statins down my throat, but I didn't really have a whole lot of options besides diet and exercise, with not a whole lot of guidance there. That's where I'm a little bit upset about this, and that's why we're here making this video. So I really needed to discover, how much at risk am I? And it turns out, based upon my trifecta of numbers, not very much. So I had to find a couple more studies where we break it down. I may have said there's 3, there's actually 4 that I have here. And so what we have to do is look for these studies. Now in this case, it was done in China. And these are Chinese individuals. I'm not Chinese, but I like to know everything across different races. We are all humans, but we are not all genetically the same. Is there a chance that there might be some gene variations where this is trouble? So it's interesting to look at what happens in Asia, for instance, although my ancestry is probably a little bit closer to the Norwegian individuals. Anyway, this study was published in 2001. And so it's like crazy how long this data has been out there, and people aren't really talking about it. So this was another study doing the exact same thing, and here they were breaking down the high LDL versus low LDL groups at 130 once again. And in this case, HDL strikes again. But what's really interesting here is that the high LDL group actually had the lower chance. If you just split it in half, and it's basically like statistically insignificant, but if you just split them in half once again at 130, the higher LDL group had a lower chance of heart disease. Now it's a 0.97 odds ratio, so let's not be too crazy about that. But once again, it kind of shows LDL alone is not enough to break it up. But guess what was here again? HDL, or more specifically, the total cholesterol to HDL ratios. Now we'll show up this chart on the screen. It's a little bit tough to see, but it turns out of the 4 groups, once again, my phenotype here, I'm in the group of individuals who has the lowest risk of coronary heart disease. And in this case, it's 0.97, where I have a high LDLC, but a low total cholesterol over HDL ratio. But in a way, I have enough of the healthy HDL cholesterol to quote unquote kind of make up for the LDL, so to speak. And that's kind of like a made up way of talking about it, but that's kind of how the math plays out in a way and how the statistics break out. So the real trouble, of course, is once again, if your HDL is too low, yet you have high total cholesterol, you have a very high total cholesterol to HDL ratio, and then in that group, it's quite bad. But what's even crazier is in this study, the people in that bad risk, the high risk group, even they have a far worse chance of getting heart disease if they have low LDL with the bad HDL and total cholesterol markers. So in this study, like everything that you assume to be right is not right at all. And in China, especially, and Chinese they actually do get insulin resistant a little bit differently. They don't, many of you may know some Chinese people, they actually don't really get obese like Europeans and Americans like we do, but they can show a lot of insulin resistance and not even know it. So so things are definitely different in China. Don't get me wrong. I'm not like kind of correlating this to every single human out there, but at the same time, the trifecta of bad stuff that we would think is bad is not even the worst case for China. In fact, their lower LDL individuals were the ones at most risk in both of their two subgroups. So something clearly is clearly not right here with using LDL alone as a risk factor. It's definitely worth looking more into though, and that's why we're here. Now on this note, getting a little bit personal here, HDL, I do want it to be a little bit higher. They're breaking it down at 5.0 for the total cholesterol to HDL ratio. Mine's at 4.56. And I think you really want to be a little bit under 4.5. That's when the data gets a little bit cleaner, and you really, really want to be under like 4.2. So if anything, I need to either get my HDL up or maybe drop down my LDL a little bit to kind of fix up that number a little bit if I'm chasing numbers. And that's something we're going to do with some of my diet experiments. So subscribe to the channel. But in general, I need to look to find ways of keeping HDL high. When your HDL is high, you're not insulin resistant, most likely, and you're in a way better situation in terms of risk for coronary heart disease. So finally, and I'm pulling in research from many different experts and everything, there's one more observational study where we break down the individuals. And once again, this was published in 2001. I'm talking about Jeppeson, 2001. We've had this stuff for nearly 20 years, and we're still just throwing statins at people with LDL without looking at other data. Anyway, so this is a little bit smaller though. There's like 2,900 individuals, and it was men. They were 53 to 74 years old again, so not exactly my demographic, but hey, this is what we have here. And once again, it was an 8-year study looking for ischemic heart disease. When they stratified the data, they flat out came to this conclusion, which we have quoted here in the blog post. Men with conventional risk factors for IHD have a low risk of IHD if they have low triglyceride, high HDLC levels. So in this case, the conventional risk factor they're talking about is just LDL on its own. What they're seeing is that triglyceride, serum triglyceride, was far more powerful. So once again, we have the chart here where they break it up into two different groups. We have low LDL and high LDL, and the two groups are almost exactly the same. It's not a very good risk indicator on its own. But when you break down the subgroups, you get similar things happening in each one. If you have higher HDL, greater than or equal to 57, which is the group I'm in, and you have lower triglyceride, less than or equal to 97, then you are in the far lower risk categories of your respective group. Doesn't matter, high or low LDL, these are the two groups that have the lowest risk for ischemic heart disease. Once again, it has nothing to do with LDL alone. It is not a strong risk factor. And so hopefully at this point you get the idea. And in fact, Dr. William P. Castelli of who actually ran the Framingham heart study, that was the first of the 4 studies we talked about, he actually stated the following. Unless LDL levels are very high, such as 300 milligrams per deciliter or higher, they have no value in isolation in predicting those individuals of coronary heart disease. And this research continues through 2019. There was a recent study in January stating similar things. It's all cited in the blog post we have here over and over and over. LDL alone is not enough. You have to look at the other numbers. So what we need to realize is that we're looking for, when we believe that we have healthy diets and when we have a low and when we have low glycation, like a low HbA1c number, low inflammation, low inflammatory diets in general, we realize that we need to look for actual causality, not associations. I can associate a lot of things. There's a funny meme where Britney Spears wrote the song "Work Bitch" and unemployment went down. Does that mean that she caused it? I don't think so, maybe. But honestly, associations. When we're dealing with like doling out 50 years of drugs to some guy who's otherwise fit and healthy, associations aren't enough. And a lot of research has shown that LDL has not been connected to causality. What are the causes of heart disease? Is LDL, if you have a really bad diet, is LDL going to go up? Oh yeah. But is your blood sugar going to go up? Is your insulin going to go up? Is your coronary calcium score going to be higher? Chances are yes. Is your HbA1c going to end up higher? Chances are yes. And that's where we're kind of going with things in part 2. So there's other factors to look at. Meanwhile, and now this is where things get really fun and interesting, I earlier mentioned a man named Dave Feldman. Now he is a research scientist and he is leagues beyond me in intelligence levels. So if you're really, really interested in this, you need to go find Dave Feldman. And he's the owner and operator of cholesterolcode.com. And he's been working to understand what this whole lipid hypothesis is about and if it's really true for all types of dieters. And he doesn't believe it is. So Dave follows like a similar trajectory as myself in that he went on a ketogenic diet, felt better than ever, but his doctors freaked out when they saw a high LDL score. Now Dave, being a scientist, wanted to figure out if this is for real. He found a lot of the studies that we're talking about here. He wanted to see for himself what happened. And what he did, and he started getting countless blood tests, tinkering with his diet, figuring out what would happen. And he found that if you do nothing but eat Wonder Bread, like white bread, and hot dogs, processed meat, he could tank his LDL score in a matter of 3 days and really tank it in the matter of a week. Now, it's really interesting, and if you start to understand how cholesterol works and the mechanisms, and we're getting more into the studies here than the actual mechanisms, because Dave has his own hypotheses. If you start understanding a lot of that stuff, it starts to make sense. And the question really is, if this guy can basically eat Wonder Bread and hot dogs, which I don't think we would all agree is really a healthy dietary choice, if you could just eat nothing but that for 3 days and make your blood work look really good, is this a variable that we want to be basing lifelong drug treatments upon? It's a little bit much. And what's funny is that Dave can do this repeatably and reliably, and I'm sure that if you're a famous person, you invite him to your podcast and you said, Dave, show up with an LDL of 172, he will come in plus or minus 10 points. That's how good he has gotten at hacking this LDL score. It's just not trustworthy enough to be making major decisions. Is it an indicator that we need to redo more research? Absolutely. If you're here watching this and your numbers look like trash, all of your numbers look like trash, then there might be a good chance that you want to change your diet, or you might want to go on statins. If you have coronary calcium, there's a good chance you want to go on statins to stabilize that plaque. But alone, it's just not enough. And Dave kind of proves it, because this is a finicky number that you can mess with in a lot of different ways, and that's what he's been doing. And he's actually coming up with a whole new model of how he believes, and he calls it I believe the energy lipid model, where he is talking about the hypotheses that work for all individuals, not just people eating the standard American diet. Because there's a lot of us who are getting into this low carb world. We're getting back to a species appropriate, ancestral friendly diet. And we're realizing that we kind of don't fit in the system here. And that's why people like myself, people like Dave, need to do a crap load of research, and it's really helpful if we can put it out here. And that's why I'm here making this video, because this is the start of the journey. Now, I'm not gonna hang my hat on LDL and all that stuff like Dave has, but it goes to show that we can tinker with these numbers, and if we can tinker with them that easily, I need more information before you're gonna throw me on drugs forever. In the meantime, For decades and decades, we've been throwing statins at people. I saw a statistic like nearly 1/4 of like middle-aged men were on statins at this point. But what have they done for us? There's some studies starting to come out showing, honestly, kind of random numbers. Like some people get less heart disease, some studies don't. And the mortality risk is really not going down much at all. So what most people are worried about is like living healthy lives and not having side effects, but also not dying. And a lot of these drugs aren't really touching mortality. And if they do, it's like on average, like not much, a month or two. You know, honestly, if I die a month earlier because I didn't take a drug that didn't make my feet numb or tingle or something like that, or didn't make my muscles sore, I'm okay with that. My daughter will forgive me. And so at this point, you get to meet the LDL paradox. Now, the LDL paradox is something that some of the researchers see and talk about when they can't explain the research. And one of the studies that came out showed with elderly individuals in the hospital, those with the lowest LDL levels actually died a far more frequent amount than those in the higher LDL groups. So a lot of us are starting to believe, especially in the elderly, which I'm not, but a lot of us are starting to believe that in the elderly groups, LDL may even be cardioprotective. If you're in a hospital with ultra low LDL, that's not necessarily a good thing. And we're talking about like over 9% risk of death compared to 3.5 and 2.8% risk of death. And just being in a hospital alone is not a good situation. Those are like basically the infection centers of the city right there. But either way, LDL alone, in fact, things are starting to look a little bit upside down once you get to a certain age. And that's what they call the LDL paradox. My comment is that it's not a paradox. It's just a variable that's not associated with really much of anything, especially with low-carb dieters and especially with the elderly. So getting back to Dave Feldman, he's on a mission, and this is where I say I'm not going to hang my hat on that stuff. I'm going to make these 3 videos, and we're going to talk about it in my future blood test, and that's enough. You're not going to see Mike talking about LDL every damn day now, so don't worry about that. But Dave Feldman is, and he's on a mission. He says this: find me a single study without drugs where you have high LDL but also high HDL and low triglyceride. Find me a single study where those individuals in that trifecta have a greater risk for heart disease, and he will pay you $1,000. He actually threw that challenge down on Twitter over a year ago, and that study does not exist. Now, I'm not saying that it will never happen. I'm just saying that the data points to this interesting trifecta of individuals, like myself. We don't get heart disease as much as a lot of the other LDL data may indicate. There's more to it than that, as we've seen with all the studies we're talking about, non-drug-based studies. We want to look at what happens with non-drugged individuals, because those drugs may be doing other things. They are doing other things. And so at this point, as Dave went down this road, he started talking about it and going to, the first time I saw him speak, I believe it was in KetoCon 2017, he started collecting a whole lot of individuals who were like this. And he started seeing very, very similar things. First off, they were lean, very low body fat, at least by today's standards. In men, less than 20% body fat. And for women, less than 23% body fat. Second, they had the profile as I speak with you know the high HDL, high LDL, low triglyceride. They had the trifecta. Third, they're on very, very low carb diets, whether it's a carnivore diet, which has been trending a little bit more, or just a very ketogenic diet. And fourth, the most interesting, and I also follow in this one, they almost never get sick. Almost never get sick. Why is that? So Dave found these groups, he found these individuals, and he calls them lean mass hyperresponders. They were originally called hyperresponders, but what he realized is that a lot of these individuals were lean, and even leaner than me. If you look at the picture on Facebook, you got a lot of jacked guys and gals there who have less body fat than me. So so these individuals, everyone's getting the push from their families and from their doctors that, hey, you have high LDL, you need to go on drugs, you need to stop that keto diet. Really? They look pretty fit and happy to me. I don't see them dying. They're doing pretty damn good. So there's a whole support group called lean mass hyperresponders, and we're starting to realize, and Dave's starting to realize, and this is where he's kind of hanging his hat, at least for now, that this might be a whole new phenotype of individual. And it seems like there's a lot of pressure to stay away from the keto diet because of this LDL number, And I think you're going to realize that there's a lot more people who are hyper responders like this than anyone wants you to believe. And it throws a whole huge wrench into the whole statin situation. Because statins, I do believe they are very useful for the right individual. But prescribing them to 1/4 of the general population, come on people, doesn't work. So those are the LMHRs, or lean mass hyperresponders. And I find the most interesting thing is that a lot of us, we don't get sick. What's the deal with that? Is there something protective about it? And so Dave goes in and he speaks and he has this whole new energy lipid model that he talks about. And in general, like my take on it, this is a little bit different than I think Dave would explain it. But my take is basically like, we are so lean. And I'm not saying I'm so lean, we're quite lean individuals where our bodies, we don't have a whole lot of energy coming from carbohydrate. And I'm going to start tinkering with that. That's where this journey's going to go, so don't worry. We don't have a lot of energy coming from carbohydrate, but we also don't have a lot of triglyceride floating around either. We're sitting here pretty lean. And so the next thing the body does is it starts mobilizing cholesterol. And that's where a lot of this high LDL comes in. However, we need to know more data about this. And the truth of the matter is, and this is the scariest part, there's no long-term data based upon individuals specific exact to our situations. Like, we haven't been fully thoroughly studied. And I do believe that a lot more people are like this than anyone wants to believe. And that's why there's quite a big resistance to all of this. However, we need more data. Over the course of a lifetime, if I were to live like this, I honestly don't know what would happen. And a lot of us don't. We're finally getting back to ancestral, species appropriate diets. And this is one of the things that happens. However, I do have theories on how I can lower my LDL, and we are going to be going there. First off, I'm going to be taking more carbohydrate pre and post workout because I have a few theories on these things, but also for performance reasons, because they taste good, and because I do believe that carbohydrate is an addictive drug. But knowing that, I think I can control it. Especially, one of my other theories is that carbs and fats don't go together. I'll take the carbs of the protein, I'll take the fats of the protein, all three of them, or even the carbs and fats together. Not going to do the ice cream, not going to do the chips, not going to do the hamburgers or fries. Also, I believe that changing out, I was eating a lot of beef before this data. Eventually, we need to change out a lot of that saturated fat for omega-3. We're going to go fish heavy at some point. That's going to be a test, and I believe that will help change LDL, but I don't want to change all these variables at once because that'd be a bad experiment. You see where we're going here? So over the course of time, this is what's going to happen here. But in the meantime, am I worried about my high LDL? Absolutely not, because everything else is in line. And in fact, if you go to the risk calculators, and this is going to be in part 2 of this video series and the blog post, if you go to the 4 major 10-year risk calculators, 3 of the 4 don't even ask you for LDL. If the statisticians and the mathematicians don't even need it to calculate risk, should we really be prescribing drugs based upon that? Now, granted, the LDL can be inferred kind of from the total cholesterol and HDL numbers, which a lot of them ask for, but these risk calculators don't even care. So why should we? We need to care about the other things, the things that have more risk. And if you plug my data into those 4 risk calculators and average them out, I have, over the next 10 years, I have a 1.25% chance of coronary heart disease. And that is almost as low as you're going to get it. It's really tough to get things below 1%, and it's not worth taking drugs to do that. There's too many side effects overall. The other risk factors, such as diabetes and HbA1c and insulin, and just looking at your coronary calcium score, which is something I need to do now, obviously, that I was rejected from that doctor. He said that I'm too young, it'll probably show up as 0. Yeah, it will probably show up as 0, but upon my research, turns out that there are young individuals who, if they don't have a 0 score, if you do have calcified arteries, then you are in trouble. And so the fact that I was rejected that test is thoroughly upsetting. So that's something we're going to have to cover as well. It's a $100 test here in America. I heard in Europe it's definitely more expensive. You have to come to the States to get it, and sorry for that. But why not? If you want to see if you're at risk, why not just look at a scan? It's not perfect, but it shows a way, way, way stronger association with heart disease. So if you're still here watching, I really thank you. Check out the blog post if you need some references. In general, I think you can kind of see where I'm going with this. Yeah, PricePlow, we've done a lot of supplement reviews, and that's great and all, but I think there's bigger pictures out there. We're going to get into the food. We're going to be testing out some of these strategies. We're going to test out, if I eat nothing but beef or nothing but meat, what's the difference between grass-fed or grass finished really. What's the difference in my lipids between grass finished and just getting the cheap stuff at the grocery store? These are the things I want to test. Right behind me, you're gonna see me hooking up a blood glucose monitor. We're gonna see some blood sugar curves on standard foods. We're gonna do some tests. And so I'm gonna be carbing up a little bit over the next period of time, and we're gonna go and retest lipids. So in order to start this journey, and there are gonna be some changes at Price Plow. A lot of you old school fans are gonna be excited about them, but then a lot of you, if you see a Mike video where I'm just like testing how much does oatmeal change my blood sugar, yeah, you can skip that one, but I think there's gonna be some interesting stuff here. Either way, I don't take this situation lightly, and I want to know how my body works. And that's why I'm excited to hook up the blood glucose monitor. So I'm going to get one last series of tests. That'll be the starting point, and then it's time to roll in the carbohydrates. I really hope that you can join us in this endeavor, in this journey. I'm going to be doing things that I never wanted to do. You know, showing pictures of my chest and stuff like that. You don't have to click on that if you don't want to see it. But at the same time, if you're in this space, it's worth being able to know what diet works best for you. Is it really true that mixing carbs and fats is a bad idea, or is it just calories in, calories out? I want to test this for myself, and it's gonna be tough to see certain things. I'm gonna try to keep things as stable and as unchanged as possible, and I'm gonna try to have like very similar workouts and all that. It's all coming to Price Plow, and so I thank you for watching. In the next video, we're gonna talk about my general thoughts on the keto diet and where I think a lot of people are going wrong, and I think a lot of our regular followers kind of know where that is at. And then after that, the changes are coming. So thanks again for watching. We're not done with the whole cholesterol thing. We're going to talk about heart disease a little bit more here and talk about where the real risks are. I think you can kind of already get the picture of where that's going to go. But in general, I want to talk about more broad diet things and a little bit about body composition, and not just hang my hat on a few numbers that, quite honestly, on their own, they're just associative numbers, and they're not enough information for me to go on drugs. My name is Mike Roberto. Thanks again for following. We'll see you down in the comment section.
Welcome to Price Plow.